Hey guys, my name's Chris Lanning, and this is the QC Show. Welcome back to part 2 of my chat with Richard Liu. Enjoy the show. When we talk about comic books, we're talking about Superman, and that's what I grew up with, Superman and Batman. But then there's like the whole Marvel universe, and I was really not so familiar with Marvel. And now it's like such a huge part of, movies for sure.
It's funny because you mentioned Marvel and you're probably referring to the MCU,
And what's MCU for people who might not know?
the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which means the Iron Man, Iron Man, Captain America, all that, Avengers. What's funny is that people say that you have to be faithful to the comic books, faithful to the source material in order for the movies to succeed. Actually, that's not true. Iron Man is a far cry. Iron Man in the comics is a far cry from what the Iron Man in the movies is. He's a lot broodier in the comics. He's an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic, and he's been through a lot. And it wasn't until the Iron Man movies became successful that this personality of like Robert Downey Jr. becomes Tony Stark. Captain America is pretty much the same. You'd have a little more self-righteousness in the comic books, but I think that comes out in the movies as well. So they made significant changes. Like Guardians of the Galaxy is completely different in terms of the makeup of the characters and personalities. They make it work and they make it fun. And then the comic books change to adapt to the movies, which is kind of interesting because most people will think that they took everything from the comics, which isn't true.
So basically, the comics are like a stepping off point that allow the movies to evolve in their own way.
I would say Disney and Warner Brothers owning these two properties is probably just a content creator where they get characters and they get churn them out, and the comics themselves actually probably aren't that important in terms of their bottom line. They're important to me and fans and like people like that, but they're probably more to keep up copyrights and IPs, and so they have content to create into movies. That'd be my guess.
And so that being said, I think in some cases people feel movies are like the superior medium, but why are the comics so valuable? Well, I mean, in the sense that, of course, there's a lot of dollar amount put on older comics, but comic book readers really cherish those comic books. And some people never get into the comic books; they just jump right to the movies. But the comic books still have a very strong hold in the industry for some people. Why do you think that is?
Neil Adams once said that if you took the greatest artist in the world and have him do a painting or a picture or whatever, it'd be considered a classic. If you take the greatest writer in the world and have him write a novel, that's also the greatest thing of literature. If you combine the two, you have a comic book, you have a graphic novel. And if you have the best writer and the best artist combined, you can create a world of like imagination, and it's going to be visual for you. I think it's sad that the 1960s really kind of made comic books into like a childish thing. They made this campy, family-friendly, kid-friendly kind of thing, and they couldn't really tell the stories they wanted to tell. Some artists did kind of break away with that, but for the most part, especially when I was growing up, it was considered like a childish type of thing. You weren't really mature if you were reading comic books. You had to be reading books. And the same with cartoons in that vein. It's really only a medium. You can tell very complicated stories based on anything you want, really, in that medium. You don't have to be limited to superheroes. We're just talking about superheroes now, but you could tell a story about anything. Same way you can with movies. Movies aren't just one genre. There are multiple genres, multiple stories. I think it's a shame that a lot of people are still stigmatized to think that comic books are like for children, when a lot of them really aren't appropriate for children.
And that seems to lend in the direction of the graphic novel now, that suddenly, that sounds more mature.
Yeah, they took a comic book, they stuck them together, and now it's a graphic novel.
Yeah. Even in Taiwan, sometimes I recommend people that I work with to read comic books if they want to improve their English. And they kind of shy away from that because they do seem to think that it's not what adults should do. But then when I call it a graphic novel, they're like, oh.
It's marketing, right? You just rebrand the comic book as a more mature thing, and all of a sudden it's legit.
Yeah. Can you talk about the difference between DC and Marvel?
DC really started with the birth of Superman. Behind it came Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, etc., etc. When they were created, the stories that they would tell were kind of idealized stories where the good was good, the bad was bad. People got punished, and there was no hesitation saying, why am I doing this? Why is Superman helping people? That's who he is. He helps people. Even back in 1942 or 1943, when like other superheroes were coming out, they were all basically along this line, including Captain America and Namor. And Marvel at the time, they were called either Timely or Atlas. They created characters that were kind of weird. They created Submariner, Namor the Submariner, which was Prince of Atlantis, who kind of was a jerk to people. Human Torch, who was an android that would set himself on fire and fly around and help people. Captain America was going around punching, Nazis in the face. So they had these edgier characters. DC was really the giant back then. Then in 1950s, I want to say 55, 54, somewhere around there, Frederick Wertham published a book called Seducing the Innocent, something like that. He said that Batman was homosexual with Robin and pedophilia. You had Wonder Woman always being in bondage, so BDSM was high on the thing. And then Superman was this idealized Ubermensch and painted superheroes in such a way that they were evil. They were kind of evil to children. They were horror comics. They were crime comics. They were, all these comics were kind of influencing children to be delinquents. So they decided to create the Comics Code Authority, the CCA. And that basically shut down all comic books. Basically, all comic books disappeared. They went to romance comics. They went to, Archie. They went to, except Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. These three kind of stuck it out throughout that time. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because if this didn't happen, then there would be a flooded market of superheroes. But in 1963, Stan Lee was about to quit the comic book industry. He was there since the 1940s, and he had always kind of hated how everything was done. So he was going to quit, and his wife said, well, if you're going to quit, why don't you just do one comic book your way? Do it in a mature way. And so he created the Fantastic Four, he created Daredevil, he created all these characters, like a bunch of X-Men, Iron Man, going on and on and on. What he did was interesting. The other contrast of DC characters were good is good, bad is bad, good fights bad, good wins. Now you had characters that were good, but they were conflicted. Thing hated being the Thing. He didn't want to be a superhero. He wanted to be a normal guy who wants to have rocks as skin. Daredevil was blind. X-Men were hated, so people hate them, but they had to protect them. Marvel comics were really more edgy. If I got superpowers, this is probably how I would think. I would think, do I go save people, or do I go, like Spider-Man? The first thing he did when he got powers was to go try to earn money, because he was poor. He didn't care about saving people. He didn't care about that until later when he learned his lesson. And really, these were morality tales, right? So Marvel was really the one pushing out like more real characters. If you go back and read them now, compared to what the comic books that are pushing out now, it reads a lot campier. But at the time, it was it was a far departure from what DC was doing. And that carries on into today, where Marvel is more edgy and DC is more morally up and down right.
So at the end of the day, where do you hang your hat?
I always like two books, X-Men and The Flash, and specifically the Wally West Flash. I've always loved The Flash, and it's just a fun book to read, but it got really good when I started getting, in middle school, when I started being able to appreciate comic books more. X-Men were always I was a little Asian kid in a very, very white neighborhood, in a very, very white town. So I was one of maybe 3 Asian kids, and there were like maybe 2 or 3 black kids, and the rest of the 200 kids were all white or Jewish. Or I wasn't bullied so much, but I mean, I say little kid, but I was still pretty tall for my age. So I wasn't bullied so much as just I felt different. I felt different from them, from the rest of my peers. They were eating, bologna sandwiches, and I was having pork floss sandwiches and dumplings and stuff like that. And it was just different levels of I saw it as me being different from them and isolating myself.
Yeah, and you probably had to do a lot of explaining about your lunch. And
at the time, there were Chinese restaurants, but people didn't go there that often. It was till later that kind of became part of the culture to go to these other culture restaurants. But at the time, it was kind of oh, that's weird, I don't like the texture of that, or it was just different. the X-Men to me kind of represented me. Like I was different from them. So how do they deal with it? They were different. They were separated from the society, right? They were kind of unknown. They were feared. I wasn't feared, but like that's kind of how I felt about growing up. I was kind of separated from the general class.
So you feel comic books kind of helped fill that gap?
Right. Plus, it's like fun to read, so why not?
Right. Hey, Rich, thanks for taking the time today to share this with me. It's really cool to hear more about, what drives you, because I know whenever we meet, the comic books kind of comes up a little bit.
Yeah, I hear you.
Hey guys, so that's it for another episode of the QC Show. Hope you enjoyed it. And please don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to receive updates, and hit that like button. That's probably the best way to find out when we upload new episodes. So far, we have no comments, so please leave a comment. Maybe let us know who you'd like to hear from or what you'd like to talk about. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the show, and see you next time.